Hello and welcome to our fifth edition of the Bellevue Chamber webinars that we've been hosting over the last few weeks. It's great to be with you. My name is Joe Fain. I'm the CEO and president of the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, and we've got another great lineup of folks that can be very helpful for us right now, especially in light of the fact that working from home and telework is no longer the wave of the future. It's the current situation that we find ourselves in, and in many cases, the inescapable situation that we find ourselves in. But it's just wonderful to have you and to spend the next hour talking to some really great experts that are focused on providing some strong advice and guidance and consulting to businesses of all sizes about how to manage the day-to-day operations of companies, large and small, in this new distributed workforce. What I'd like to do to kick off here is talk a little bit about some of the things that the Chamber's done since the crisis has begun, and hopefully drive folks here that are tuning in to some of the resources that are available to you. We'll be doing a host of additional webinars, webcasts in the following week on a whole host of different topics, including cybersecurity, healthcare, a number of other topics. You can go to our website, bellevuechamber.org/webcast, and see our previous 4 webcasts posted up there. We've had everyone from major U.S. economists for Bank of America to local mayors and chairs of the King County Council to nonprofit leaders that are serving the East Side in particular, in not only finding a way to help those that are in need in our community and are often being overlooked, especially now with this crisis, but also those nonprofit organizations that are at the forefront of helping people react and thrive in these challenging times. But to kick off today, I want to introduce to you a great East Side businessman, Rich Stillman. Rich is the CEO of Kalabra. He has had a number of C-suite roles in the past, including one at Bellevue's own Coinstar, which of course has been a tremendously successful company that he helped grow from $80 to $550 million in just over 5 years. He now assists a number of companies strategically growing, especially those that are on a fast growth pace. And what's really interesting for this conversation here today is that he does his work almost entirely remotely. So he has been in this space for some time, has a lot of expertise and a lot of great information to share with us today. Thank you, Rich. Welcome. And how has this changed the environment for you as someone who has been used to teleworking for some time?
Interesting how little things have changed for me because I do have clients all across the country, and this is my normal mode of working. So I've been helping people get more acclimated to it simply by virtue of the fact that it's really sort of common practice for me these days.
Well, I know that you've got some best practices that you've been sharing with some of your clients and the companies that you work with, and that you're going to share with us today to help us walk us through not only how we can transition ourselves into the new mindset of remote work, but also some of the pitfalls that you probably discovered firsthand when you moved from in these large growth companies with a number of staff rolling around the office all day long to trying to make sure that you can keep people motivated and with a singular vision thousands of miles away.
Right. Good. Thanks, Joe. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and kick this off. Hopefully everybody can see that. There are basically 3 main takeaways for everybody today in terms of managing staff remotely. The first is you really got to dial up the active listening and empathy for sure. The second is try and find opportunities to create as much face-to-face interaction as you possibly can. And the third is put a really high focus on your plan and the process that you have for generating the results that that plan is intended to create. Those are the, if nothing else, those are the 3 main things I'd love for you to take away. So active empathic listening. You know, it's hard enough when you're in an office environment and you can actually see the person and kind of get a sense of what's going on. But just as this picture suggests, one person's 6 is another person's 9. And it becomes completely exaggerated when you're working in a remote environment and you don't have those opportunities for the sight, sound, and motion that an in-person conversation would offer you. Even if you can see the person via video chat, there's still part of the vibe that you're missing. And so really practicing, you know, great active listening becomes incredibly important. And, you know, as you can see from this chart, just paying attention is just the beginning of it. It's actually, it takes a lot of energy to listen actively, but really important for you as the manager to really be tuning into what your direct reports are saying or what the employees are saying, your peers, whatever. So that, and then it's not just understanding what people are thinking, but it's also understanding how people are feeling about it, and really trying to dial up the ability to empathize with the situation. It is not business as usual now. And so, you know, really looking at the world through other people's lenses becomes so important. I was recently listening to a TED Talk from a guy named Chris Voss, who wrote a book called Don't Split the Difference. And he's talking about this concept of tactical empathy, or what he called weapons grade empathy. And I loved the imagery that phrase brings up, because that's really what we're aiming for, is this like really powerful, really in-depth, really focused understanding. And he's very careful to note that empathy is not necessarily agreement. It's simply complete, in-depth understanding of the way the other person is viewing the situation. So that combination of active listening and then listening with a lot of empathy is probably the most important thing that I recommend to people as they're managing remote employees. The second is to try and create as much face-to-face as you can. And, you know, of late, of course, you can hardly get out of bed without bumping into a story about the explosive growth of Zoom and how many meetings people are having on Zoom these days. And the big meetings are great. And, you know, all of my clients are having sort of weekly all hands type meetings. And I don't want to discount that. But at some level, if you're in a room with 20 people and everybody's talking, it's not really much of a conversation. And it doesn't really replicate that social feeling of being in the office where you're having conversations with different people throughout the day. And so I've really been stressing people to find other tools that allow that type of smaller group interaction, either one-to-one or, you know, a couple of people, 3 people, whatever it might be. And even better, to try and create that sense of how do I simulate like I'm going to walk down the hall and I'm going to talk to one of my colleagues. And so the opportunities to connect throughout the day can be daily stand-ups. And I'm recommending that there's usually one at the beginning of the day for sure, and then maybe one at the end of the day. And this can be departmental or teams within departments. But that morning and afternoon check-in provide a nice structure to the day. Of course, the weekly all hands. Maybe you all are having virtual happy hours with your friends or family. I know my wife and I have been doing a lot of that with our friends and our family. But it's also a great thing to do in the company environment as well. In fact, I just did it with some colleagues of mine last night. And it's a great way to stay connected and see everybody at a time when you're not able to put physical eyes on them. But then there's the opportunity for the smaller lunch gatherings, right? So how do you create the opportunity to have you and another person, or you and 2 or 3 other friends get together? And since you need that structure to actually take lunch, so let's do lunch in a video chat so that we can not necessarily always be on video talking about business, but use that video connection to be able to make the social connection happen as well. and that helps provide that sense of more of a sense of normalcy at a time when we're taken away from our physical work environments. It feels a little strange for some, and perhaps a little artificial. So think about how each of those different types of connections can work together to help make people productive, but also to help make them feel like they're still connected in more of a normal way. And then, like I said, how do we simulate that sense of just being able to walk down the hall and talk to a colleague? You know, hey, I've got a question. I'm just going to go knock on the door. Do you have a minute to talk to me? And then you can do that. And there are lots of other tools besides scheduling a meeting through something like a Zoom that make that pretty simple. Hangouts is one. I'm a big fan of whereby.com, which allows you, for free, by the way, to create your own little room. Mine is whereby.com/Stillman. And I have my desktop notifications set up so that if someone wants to talk to me, I get a little notification that says, you know, Joe Fain is knocking. Do you want to let him in? Perfect. And then Joe and I can have a conversation. And in that way, I have clients that are reaching out to me frequently during the day with a question or two. And when I'm not in a meeting, I take that video call. Much better to do those conversations, not through email and not over the phone, but as much as possible, let's use technology to try and do those quote unquote face-to-face. Trello uses either Whereby or Hangouts as that's built into their tool. Microsoft Teams has a video component, as does Slack. And so the point is that there are a lot of different ways for us to not only have the big one-to-many meetings or these group meetings like a Zoom enables so well, but also an opportunity to have the more intimate conversations. And then the third point is to rigorously maintain focus on your plan. And this is where the video opportunities that we've been talking about really come together. But and it's larger than your plan. This is a supremely important time to be focusing on the fundamental values of the organization. It is so easy when you're disconnected from people to misinterpret things, right? And so the value system, the fact that we like each other and we're going to support each other, reminding people of that, encouraging them to provide a lot of grace so that as we're acclimating to this new way of working, you know, we don't get bent out of shape if something doesn't feel right. So reinforcing the value is very important. Keeping people focused on the larger objectives of the organization, not necessarily the specific work that they're doing, but what it all adds up to, so that you get this constant reiteration of the cool things that your business is aimed at and why it's so important to be working on those things, and how valuable the work that each and every employee is doing, how valuable that work is. You keep a focus on the objectives, and then you can layer in what I call a rhythm of the business. What's the daily structure and the processes that you use to keep people focused on the work at hand? Who's doing what? When's it due? Trying to create that sense of accountability without micromanaging. My biggest observation is where there are gaps with businesses in those types of rhythm of business areas, it becomes exaggerated in this environment of having people working remotely. And then lastly, as a leader, CEO, manager, whatever, this is a wonderful time to be ever grateful for people's contributions and to be calling them out. You know, not in a Pollyanna kind of way, but making sure that you're recognizing when people are doing great things and thanking them for that. There's some online planning software, if you don't have it, that works really well for times like these. My three favorites are Ally, myally.io, Align Today, and this is not a shameless plug for Kalabra, but we have an online planning system that works pretty well as well. So in summary, keep in mind that, probably including you, everybody's off their game a little bit. Everybody's on edge. Everybody's a little anxious. So it's a great time to embrace that. Embrace the fact that it's not business as usual. As a result, therefore, over communicating is really the rule. That's how you make sure that you don't let things fall through the cracks, right? Think about how you can make frequent deposits in people's emotional bank accounts, right? Through being grateful and through noticing the work that they're doing and the contributions that they're making. And then lastly, create and focus on that rhythm of business that's so important. It provides the structure that people both want and need. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's just a host of great advice there. I want to follow up with a quick question that your last slide kind of brought up. We're constantly been living in a world of where everybody talks about work-life balance, and there's a lot of research and advice out there that says, you know, work at work and don't bring anything home with you, because you want to have that mental separation. You want to be on your game at work and you want to be with your family at home. That doesn't exist anymore. And I've heard over and over that more people are working far more hours than they ever have before, not just because of the crisis, but because of the intimate nature that work now, you know, lives with us in our personal spaces. How have you been working with your teams? What kind of boundaries are you setting? I'm sure my staff is watching this going, he's talking about boundaries. That's rich. But how are you working that, and what advice are you giving?
That's a great question. And in fact, and I've seen the same thing. Let me fill out the poll first. Oh, I can't vote. Okay, oh, bummer. My clients definitely feel like they're working much longer hours than they were before, because there's just not the ability to have that separation. And that's where those virtual happy hours really come into play. Schedule those, you know, if you're going to leave work and go have a beer with friends, it's the same type of thing. And that creates the separation that says, okay, I'm not involved in a work meeting. I'm now in a social setting. I'm going to talk with some people. And then when that ends, my work day is over and I can shut down. And that, to me, creating that intentional separation between the work day and your personal time helps really create the structure that you need to separate yourself from work.
Well, it sounds like we've got a myriad of different responses that have come through in the poll we just took, and I'm hoping to be able to share those results with folks. But it sounds like that a lot of folks are around the same. Some of them are doing more by far, and then of course folks like myself are dealing with the distractions of 1-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and small dogs. So thanks so much, Rich. We'll come back to you with some more questions here later on, but I want to again remind our participants, remind the folks that have called in, use that Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, put some questions out that you want to share with our panelists as we go through today's program. That really is the advantage of this type of a structure, instead of just maybe watching a TED Talk on YouTube. It's that interactive portion. So get those questions flowing. And in the meantime, we will move on to our next great guest speaker, our guest panelist, and that is Ashleigh Bell. She's an engagement manager at Artemis Connection, which is a strategy and consulting firm that is also built on a fully remote model. So she is well-versed in how to make this work. And I think it's just fantastic that you're with us here today. So Ashleigh, what are you learning and what are you teaching?
Thank you so much for having me. And Rich, I learned so much and was furiously taking notes. So thanks for the great
Thank you.
So I think we're all learning a lot right now. These are very strange times that we're living in, and totally unprecedented context. And I think what's interesting is that every single one of us is impacted, not just at work in the way we work together, but also in very personal, emotional ways as well. And so we're needing to carry all of that with us. So I think I've been learning a lot. And I think a huge silver lining of this is it's been a really special time to reconnect with folks who I was too busy to reach out to before, or didn't quite make the space for. So really excited to share some of my learnings with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All righty. All right, let's do it. So I want to talk today a little bit about leading from afar. We are all working on geographically dispersed teams right now, or for those of us who are working in organizations that are able to convert to a geographically dispersed model. And I really want to think about how do we drive engagement for every single person on our team, and how do we really embrace a shared responsibility regardless of our role, our positioning within the company, our experience, our age, to really call everyone into this conversation around how do we work better together right now. So I have two objectives for this very short conversation. And so I just want to acknowledge this is a huge complex topic. We could talk about this endlessly. And so today I really just think that this is starting the conversation. And I would really strongly encourage folks to find other spaces, continue showing up to these webinars, but also create other spaces as a chamber community to come together. Because I think it's great to hear from folks like us, but I also think that your greatest resource is really each other and sharing what works for you. So today I want to talk a little bit about how do we develop mindsets and habits to really foster an inclusive and collaborative work environment during this strange context. And then also I want to share some practices from my personal experience on driving high engagement on remote teams. I really want to encourage folks as I move through this conversation to approach it with a critical eye. I think one of the beauties of a community like this Bellevue Chamber community, and kind of the beauty of the time that we're living in right now, is that we're all experiencing it differently, and we're all coming from very unique and different contexts. And so how can we kind of critically comb through the content here and all of the advice that's shared with us in this conversation, and kind of pick and choose what feels possible for me and what might work for my circumstances. So three hits in our agenda. I want to talk a little bit more about the context that we're living in and some mindsets that we can carry with us as we approach this time. I want to talk about the why, what, and how. So how can each of us kind of embrace a framework for reimagining how we work together right now, every single person on a professional team. And then I want to get a little bit more tactical, and there's a lot of great overlap here that I'm really excited about from Rich's conversation around how do we collaborate, connect, and really create space to celebrate each other during this strange time and in a remote context. So I'm really excited to talk about best practices. I use the phrase best practices all the time. I think it's such an interesting phrase. So when COVID-19 started getting much more serious at a global scale, and when we were forced to sort of convert to this remote model overnight, or really reimagine what we needed to do with our business overnight, we saw this huge spike in publications around like, this is how you work from home well. A lot of folks raising their hands as experts and saying, this is how you do it. Follow these steps and you're great. And so I want to just go through a quick exercise by sharing one of these examples of someone raising their hand as an expert and providing some best practices. So this is an article that was published by Stanford Business. And so the title, Quick Thanks, Communicating and Leading Virtually. So I'm going to go ahead and read the quote. So the author and expert writes, I believe there are 4 main areas to explore as we strive to be more effective and engaging online communicators. So let's get started. The first has to do with what I call virtual presenting hygiene. This has to do with how you set up your environment and tools. First and foremost, it's important to have a place that's quiet and has a neutral background. Be thoughtful of the lighting that you have. You can invest in professional lighting for video or photography. You want to make sure you have a camera that's good quality, etc. So I want everyone listening, take a second and think through, like, who might this be difficult for? Like, think about the actual human beings on your team. Think about yourself. Who might this be challenging for? And I think everyone gets my point. Really, like, this is proposed as a best practice, but it's so important for us right now to acknowledge that what works for some may not work for others. And more importantly, what's possible for some may not be possible for others. So super important as leaders, as colleagues, as community members, that we really carry that frame with us. So digging a little bit deeper into the context, remote work in general, and especially right now in these really emotionally challenging times, it impacts every single one of us. No one is untouched by this by this context, but it's also really important for us as leaders, and I use the word leaders when I refer to anyone reimagining work right now, for folks to recognize that some of our colleagues may be at higher risk of feeling isolated or disconnected right now. So this is by no means an all-encompassing list, but this is sort of, as Rich encouraged us to do, this is a practice in building our empathy muscle. Like, how do we really think about the experiences of our other colleagues and recognize who might this be even more challenging for? So think about folks who recently moved to the area, or folks who just were hired and joined your team but haven't been trained yet, who don't have a local or in-team support system. It would be so hard to then not see folks in person and not really have clear channels of communication to feel connected and get clarity on how to move forward with business objectives. I think about the fact that all of our schools and daycares are closed right now, and people cannot send their children or their loved ones who they're taking care of to the professionals who normally help them take care of them. So people are now balancing multiple full-time jobs, but still have this expectation of productivity, and that's really difficult. And then I also think about the fact that even when we work in person, there are some folks on our team who might not feel comfortable raising their hand to speak up or ask for help. So I think about, there are a number of different reasons for this. So it could be based on someone's personality, their culture, the way they were socialized, or a history of marginalization. And so when we shift into this remote context and we have this added barrier of not being in person, not seeing body language, having the physical computer, this is an added barrier, and we all have a responsibility to really call those folks and everyone else into the conversation. So this, like all of these bits of context, are why it's so important for conversations like the one that we're all having here today, and why I'm so grateful for the folks who are not just presenting, but also who showed up and are interrogating like why we do the things that we do. So to go just one step deeper into that, I am an equity and diversity inclusion nerd. I think about it endlessly. I'm super passionate about it. And so I found this article that really resonated with me recently from entrepreneur.com called The Importance of Diversity and Inclusion During Uncertain Times. And I want to just quickly acknowledge that I think the field and concept of diversity and inclusion can feel really intimidating to folks who don't normally engage in those conversations. And so I want to also encourage us to embrace this shared responsibility for like, how do we think about including everyone right now, and how do we all share ownership of that? Not just how do we put that ownership on a certain set of people on our team. So the author advises readers to limit assumptions during these uncertain times. People are coming from various socioeconomic classes, life experiences, caregiving responsibilities, and much more. Even though we're in a shared situation, doesn't mean we all need the same support at this time. So I think this sort of gets back at Rich's point of how do we really develop empathy for one another? How do we very actively listen and scan for the boundaries that others are setting, for the things that they're asking for in order to be able to move forward? And how do we just, like, bottom line, like, don't assume what someone's situation is, because the way that we're experiencing this right now is incredibly complex. So here's a framework I have been just sort of on my own processing my experience and thinking through, like, how have I been going through the exercise of really interrogating the way that we work. And so this is sort of a framework I've developed for myself, and I think it may be helpful for others. So if we're reimagining the way we work right now, and I would love to say forevermore, this is a process we can take. So think about a specific business practice, and let's really question, why do we do it this way? Like, what is the purpose? What's our bottom line goal? And does that purpose fit our context right now? And then as we move around the circle to advocate, I encourage folks to think through, what are my personal boundaries? What's possible within my organization? Let me come to some sort of decision on if I want to try something different and advocate for it, and then try it. This brings me to our third step down at the bottom, like, let's try something new. I think this is a really great time for small scale experimentation on some of our different business processes and the way we work together. And then after trying it out a little bit, let's reflect and think, like, what do I want to keep? What was productive or meaningful about that? And then what didn't work? And that's bring us back to, like, let's interrogate it again. How can we do this even better? So one small example is if we think about professionalism. So this is a little bit more of a mindset, but it's interesting to see people's like work from home attire. And I think, at least for me, I have this pretty fixed idea of like what it looks like to be professional, right? Like for this talk, I didn't know most of the folks on the call, so I put on this blazer and like I did my hair, put makeup on for the first time in a while. But like, I want to kind of interrogate, why did I do that? Like I have the same knowledge and skills regardless of what I'm wearing. And so of course we want to sort of match our context and the expectation of our team. But it's important, sort of like Rich said, to really think through what are your boundaries, and then also like how do we communicate together what is necessary at this time. Another really quick example, we might interrogate our working hours. So for a lot of businesses and organizations, 9 to 5 might be typical working hours. But right now, if we look at the example of parents and caretakers, it is not possible to be fully on and heads down with your work in a quiet space from 9 to 5. And why? Why does it need to be that way if we're all working from our homes? And so how can we really advocate for an alternative, try something new out, and then reflect on what works and what doesn't? All right, so that was all. So we had our why. This was our what, like what do I advocate that we do? I advocate that we reimagine the way that we're working together and really dig deep and poke holes in our existing systems to make work better for everyone. And then the how, so for every single person, every individual, our experience working remotely and navigating this COVID-19 public health crisis is a huge complicated puzzle. Right? Like we all carry like these different layers of context with us that inform our experience. And so I want to encourage folks to kind of tackle these questions through different lenses or puzzle pieces. So one might be, I'm reimagining the way we work together based on the fact that I'm an individual contributor, or I'm a manager, or I'm an executive. And so kind of think through what explicit power and authority do I have within my organization? Or if I don't have a lot of explicit power and authority, what opportunities do I have to influence behavior, to influence practices, to share suggestions? Super important, back to the empathy note, to acknowledge that we're experiencing this based on our personal identities, which are incredibly complex. And it's impossible to know someone's full set of identities just by looking at them or working with them. Thinking about folks' current circumstances. So I think about our physical work from home setup. I think about the varied things, the varied priorities that we're looking to balance right now, and carrying that with us. And then also, I think a really interesting and important lens for folks to take on right now in terms of scanning for opportunities is the experience that you bring to your role. So I think normally we might be bound by our written job description and how we're being measured for performance evaluation, and that's so important. But also there's this really cool opportunity right now to take in these other skills from other contexts. So think about previous jobs you've had, think about parenting, think about philanthropic opportunities that you engage in. Like, how can you take learnings and skills and resources from those other contexts and bring them into our work right now and propose new solutions and processes? So again, this sort of brings me back to this idea of, I think everyone in this conversation is what everyone else's greatest resource, right? Like what works for me may not work for you. And so the more that we can share and really advocate for what works well for some, the bigger the bank of possibilities we'll have. So to get a little bit more tactical, and hey, Joe, how am I doing on time? Just realized I didn't hit start on my timer.
No, that's all right. About 2 more minutes would be great.
That is beautiful. Okay, so let's get a little tactical. And then I think that this is being recorded. If not, I'm happy to share the deck. So when I think about tactical ways for us to work better together right now, I think about how do we connect, how do we collaborate, and then how do we celebrate? So ton of parallels to Rich's great conversation. So in terms of connection, I love, Rich, that you brought up boundaries. It took me like 3 weeks into this work from home situation to even like have the word boundaries pop into my head. And I was like, you know what? I don't have any boundaries right now, and I probably should, and I should encourage others to as well. So in the way that we connect, I encourage teams to come together and articulate their boundaries, and then come to some sort of set of shared boundaries as a community. Maybe that's around when you're working, it's around how often you're touching base. This sort of gets at Rich's rhythm of the business, like how are we wanting to do things? How often are we connecting, and what are we expecting from one another? And then there's also like the more personal side of connecting. I'm an incredibly warm and fuzzy person, and so I love like interpersonal connection. So that gets at Rich's great point of like, how do we replicate all these small moments that we have to connect in person when we're not in the same space? So one way that we do that is I love the idea of like virtual happy hours and lunches. And then there's also just other really quick ways, like send a quick ping, like, hey, I'm thinking about you, or hey, I just read this article and it made me think of the conversation we had earlier this month. Celebrating birthdays, celebrating milestones, etc. And then again, like do this for everyone, but also do it with a particular lens to how can we support and help the folks who might be more disconnected right now. And then tactically in meetings, I recommend establishing agreements or norms. Like how are I personally have observed a shift to a much more meeting heavy culture with a lot of my clients. And so how do we ensure that meeting time is an energizer, that it's incredibly purposeful, and that for the folks planning and organizing the meeting, that it's planned intentionally to get the most out of the time together. So collaboration, getting back to this idea of expectations, but even more specifically, I encourage everyone to talk to their manager and ask, how often do you expect to hear from me? What do you want to see from me? What format of documentation should I be providing you, and how often? And how do you plan to give me feedback? Like all of these really specific questions around, like we sort of learn the answers to these questions by working together and seeing each other. But like Rich said, we need to be we have to be a lot more explicit right now. And then I'll jump down to celebration because I love it and I am a warm and fuzzy person. Like I love giving feedback. I love receiving it. I know that that can be uncomfortable for a lot of folks. And I think even regionally, we sort of have a culture of perhaps like not always sharing a ton of feedback. And so how can we take this as an opportunity in a way that feels authentic to you to really scan for what folks are doing well, whether you're a manager or a colleague, and then create ways to elevate that work. So you might create like channels through your communication tools. You might just find small moments to say thank you and give positive feedback. But there are also really important opportunities to do this in a high impact way right now by making work visible to people's managers and really like creating some documentation around how people are going above and beyond right now, so that when it comes to promotions and thinking through like future leadership opportunities, there is documentation of that great work. All right, and then here's an example of just agreements that I encourage folks to take on for their meetings and with their teams. And I won't run through the whole thing, but the one thing I will highlight is that I encourage folks to acknowledge their work from home circumstances. So you might have seen my partner walk in the background before. If I hadn't been on mute, you probably would have heard my dog asking to go out for a walk. So acknowledge it, own it, but please don't apologize for it. Like we are living in unprecedented times that we did not plan for. And so we all really need to model this sense of inclusion for one another and recognize that normally, like we all wear so many different hats, and normally, especially if we work in one physical space, we can like take off one hat and put on my work hat and you don't see the other one, but right now we're wearing all the same hats at once. And so we have to really embrace and celebrate that together. So again, there was a lot there, but today we're just starting the conversation and just really encourage folks to continue the conversation together. And so grateful, Rich, for your insights, and Britt, I'm so excited to hear what you have to share as well.
Ashleigh, thank you so much. I really appreciate how you took it from the value statements down to the practical things that folks can actually try and implement. And yes, we're all wearing a lot of hats right now, but we're also wearing sweatpants. So it's been an interesting mix. Well, I want to bring in our last panelist here. And so if we could, let's turn off the screen share really quick. There we go. Perfect. And invite Britt Provost. She's the Executive Vice President of People and Culture for Accolade. And she has been in this world of leading people organizations, and for about 15 years now. I got exposed to Britt when she and I were on a webcast last week for the University of Washington, and in the middle of her comments, I knew that we had this telework webinar coming up, and in the middle of her comments about and advice about working remotely and about working with distributed workforces, I was emailing her while she was talking, saying, "I need you on my webinar next week." And so, Britt, it's wonderful that you're able to join us. And again, thanks for saying yes.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. Look, I'm not going to try and recreate all the magic that Rich and Ashleigh kind of talked about. I do want to talk about some heart things that are happening right now. Heart, like as in heart. I think it's really important to know that my tenure at Accolade, I am not yet in my first 90 days of leading this team. And I just want to put that context out there because I think it's really important for all of us to understand kind of where everybody's at and what the challenges are that we've been kind of going through. So I'll hit 90 days next week. How exciting. Not what I expected at all in terms of kind of my experience. Just to give everybody kind of some grounding in terms of kind of where I've been. We've moved 1,256 employees across the US and the Czech Republic into their homes. We're a health-focused company where we provide advocacy on behalf of employers and people like Humana and Blue Shield of California to help support their employees through various health concerns, questions, helping them with their benefits, etc. So we are about 3 to 4 weeks into this new environment for ourselves, and it's been quite a journey. And I'm really proud of the way we've done it and the way we've kind of helped people get into this new mode. We always had Zoom, we've always had Slack, but we've had to use it in different sort of ways. And I think Rich and Ashleigh said it really, really well. I mean, we're not in a remote work environment. This is not work from home in a normal sort of situation. We are working from home in a pandemic. And I really want to make sure we acknowledge and are super clear about that. People's kids are home. Their pets are, wanting to get out, want to be on camera. People like me are spending time during the day calling their parents to find out, did they get their food delivery? Please don't go get the drive-through. All those kinds of things that we're working through in a different kind of environment. And I just don't want to underestimate as we continue to go through this, that we're also managing anxiety. We're managing grief for people because they're not graduating from school or the plans that they had are different. And so there is a huge mental health aspect to all of this that I don't think we quite know how it's going to transpire yet. And so more than ever, I would just say, Ashleigh said it well, but I'll say it even again, there should be no apologies for kids being on camera. If we want to invite them into the last 10 minutes of every meeting, we should. If they want to come to the virtual happy hours that we're hosting now, they should. I had a great moment with one of my team members this morning where her son wanted to watch a video, but it was only 44 minutes. And so she knew at some point in our conversation, she was going to have to change the video. And she apologized. And I said, didn't we talk about no sorries? So kiddo came in, wanted to get the other video, and I got to have that whole experience with her. And what I would just say is that for all of us, we should just take this moment to understand that people are bringing their whole human to work right now. We need to respect and appreciate that. We have a motto actually on my team that we call it cool minds, warm hearts, and clean hands. And so this idea of people's heart, I think, is becoming really, really important, especially as we go through these waves of anxiety and grief. I had a moment with my team this week where we were coming together, we were talking about a goals workshop, where I'm starting to become really cautious about asking people too much about how are you. And I would just encourage everybody on the call, especially as we continue to go through this, know that actually may become a more loaded term than we actually realized before. I found a great kind of resource online that was asking people to say, how's your heart? So I literally put it up on the screen. I had a cute little heart and said, how's your heart? And 2 weeks ago, when we first went out of the office, we had a ton of people had a ton of questions. What's going to happen? Are we worried about this? Are we worried about that? How's the business? All that stuff. This week, they were dead quiet. And for me as a leader, and I would suspect for a lot of people on the phone, when you hit that dead quiet, you're kind of like, oh crap, what do I do? So I continue to sort of honor the quiet and honor the space. I would encourage you guys to think about that as you're working with, whether it's your teams, whether it's your business partners or whoever else. How are you right now is a loaded question. and checking in and asking people how their heart is, I think is an important thing. But if they can't actually respond to you, honor the space, be quiet, and figure out what else you need to do. I think it's really hard because I think in a lot of cases, a lot of us are realizing the day-to-day keeps us sane. And so we are trying to fill the days with meetings and other things so we don't get distracted. I think, and we gave the advice to all of our people leaders, we want them to be visible and present. We want them to keep a meeting rhythm. But I would really encourage you all to be careful and see if how much is too much. Don't overdo. I think that daily scrum, or whether or not it's a regular weekly one-on-one, I think is good. My team added an extra meeting on Fridays so we could catch up, especially since we're doing so much to support our business right now, to make sure we've got everything covered. But that meeting's only a half hour and it's not super agenda oriented. Again, I think you're just gonna have to figure out how to hold space for your people in a different sort of way. Introverts don't love these virtual happy hours. They don't love the virtual happy hours. And so I want us to be really careful from a sense of belonging perspective that, you know, people do want to participate, but those happy hours, particularly if they're on a Friday after the weeks that we're all having now, people may be at capacity. And so you know, again, I'm a radical extrovert, so I love that moment, but there are a lot of people that just can't do it. Or if they come and it's a big group and they're quiet, you know, trying to make everybody participate, I think is a really, really hard thing. So let's just, you know, that understanding of where somebody's at, what their preferred style is in terms of introversion, extroversion, and almost, you know, how much capacity can they have by the end of the week, I think are questions that are important to be asking people. I would also say really specifically, watch the timing of meetings. Because we aren't in a rhythm yet with people's kids and other things like that, I think people are assuming just because people are home, oh, I can put that early meeting on the calendar. That may not work for people. And then the other thing is we may also need to flex. We're finding that for some of our folks, we may offer extra hours for our customers because we actually can get them coverage for kids. They can switch with their partner and figure out what's going on. And that may actually work better for our members, and that may work better for our employees. So think a lot about the timing of where you're kind of scheduling for people and what kind of capacity they can really handle. I guess all of it is, you know, be steady, be reassuring, be flexible. But the biggest thing I will say to you, if you are leading people or you're having to show up as, you know, somebody, you know, maybe you're doing some selling or whatever else that might be, self-care is no joke right at this moment. And so if you're leading people, I want you to find out how you can continue to keep your oxygen mask on and fully loaded. Because if you are not taking care of yourself, people will see it. They need you right now. As people leaders, or, you know, whatever that might be in terms of the way you're showing up and supporting your community. Take care of yourself. You know, you'll see I've got my Peloton is right next to me, and other things that I'm doing to like keep myself from going insane. And I think you just need to figure out what those rituals are. I think both Rich and Ashleigh talked about this in different ways. We need people to keep it together so that we can continue to keep it together, if that all makes sense. But this is just a really interesting time. And I think caring for your people, you know, yeah, we got to get the work done. And yeah, we're focused on the business outcomes. But part of this right now is caring for people, asking what you can do to help, recognizing there may be nothing you can do right at the moment, except for just listening. Or honestly, if somebody needs to go take a nap, they need to go take a nap. And I think we just need to be really honest and open that, you know, what we expected as normal business hours isn't the same. Ashleigh, you said it really super well. And we're going to figure this out, and hopefully we won't go on too long. But there will be waves of this. The last thing I'll say to you, and I'm trying to figure this out as a business leader, and I haven't figured it out yet. I have some tools. There's a lot that we're going to have to talk about in terms of mental health in the workplace, and being really honest about taking away the stigma of where that's been, particularly like I'm talking about, you know, if people need to check out, they need to go take a nap, for heaven's sakes, let's support all those things. But as we move from the waves of anxiety, I think we'll still always have those. We're moving into waves of grief that I don't think we fully understand yet. I don't have any good solutions, but the first aid that we're going to have to do for our folks, you know, I've got folks on the phone with people talking about their health. So I'm particularly sensitive to that. How do we take care of people through this? There's some great tools. There's some things you're going to see me post on LinkedIn that we're doing for our employees. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. I don't have all the answers, but I'm hoping in some ways this changes the work world, this idea of the whole human. We're just going to find some things out about how we go through this together that I think will make us better. So that was my perspective. And
a great perspective it is. And so it was good motivation for me to bring my work buddy here in with me. We've got about...
This is the second time Joe's done this. I make sure that he either brings a kid or a pet on the calls we're on together. So.
Well, here's Waffles, and I really hope that my 3-year-old is still sleeping. But we've got about 9 or so minutes left here, and there's a couple of maybe lightning round questions that I want to throw out there, particularly some of those that have been come in, and we've seen some similar themes. One of them is, there is a lot of difficult conversations that are happening. It's one thing to keep people motivated on task to check in, but there are layoffs, there are performance evaluations, there are people that were already in that performance evaluation pipeline and maybe were, struggling in some areas. How do you maintain continuity for those conversations? How do you have tough conversations about layoffs and disciplinary or salary reductions and furloughs in such an impersonal way as this technology? And Britt, let me start with you.
Yeah, look, we're thinking a lot about how we're going to think about performance review. I think that coaching and supporting, and we were moving to more continuous feedback model anyway. So I think that's going to be kind of consistent with where we work culturally. I think we got to be really gentle in this time and space. I'm resisting doing a lot of really hardcore things unless it's a serious issue, because I don't think we fully understand what's going on with everybody right at the moment. So we're 4 weeks in. We'll see kind of where we are. I'm advising, give coaching, give feedback, make sure you understand where people are on the harder things in terms of what businesses are deciding to do. My strong advice is be as transparent as possible. It's a really small world, and how you treat people now in this moment will be watched. If we've watched kind of on, the news and everything else, Columbia Sportswear, their CEO's not taking any money, and he's keeping all his folks paid. Powell's the bookstore has brought back 100 people because of their online business. There are a lot of things that give us a little bit of a silver lining in all this, and a lot of it is how we behave as leaders during this time. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's where my head's at.
Extremely helpful. I want to move back to the technology side of this. And Rich, you went through a number of great applications, obviously Kalabra being one of them. I'm kind of a app nut, as my staff will tell you. We are on about 19 different SaaS platforms right now. The question I have, obviously, is the obvious one. How do we bridge the digital divide at this time? We've always been able to do it with an analog alternative for a lot of our staff members that might not be able to adapt so much to the new digital world. But those analog options just aren't on the table anymore. What's the best course of action to be inclusive, as Ashleigh's been talking about?
Well, at some level, I've been recommending to clients that if people don't have, if they don't, for instance, have a web camera because they don't have a laptop that has a camera built in, these are $30 items. The company should buy webcams for people. And if the company's large enough to have IT support, then you can walk people through, the process of getting those turned on. Most of those products are kind of plug and play. You find the USB plug, plug it in, and it tends to work. And then, as Britt and Ashleigh pointed out, you have to have a lot of grace for the people who are less confident about the technology, and are less excited about it. It seems self-evident to me because this is my normal way of working, and I'm kind of a technology nerd. So, but for others, it's very foreign and it's very uncomfortable. It's like trying on a new pair of pants that don't fit very well. And so I think Britt hit it right on the head, that we've got to be able to accept that, be able to affirm that, and still try and provide an on-ramp into modes of working, as I said before, that try and replicate the social aspects and the structure of a physical work environment.
Yeah. Hey, I'd love to amplify 2 quick thoughts there, Rich. So at first, when you said webcams are $30, I was so excited to hear you say companies should buy those for their employees. I think super important right now to acknowledge, if we are expecting anything of our employees right now, we cannot assume that folks have the means to invest in this technology personally. So really grateful that you called that out. Great inclusive leadership. And then secondly, in terms of folks maybe having varying comfort levels with the technology, I think this is a great opportunity for to bring others into opportunities to lead, right? So some of our earlier in career colleagues may not be running meetings or managing folks, but maybe this is an area where they can really take ownership and spin up some trainings. So really getting creative and thinking through, how can we give our colleagues opportunities to lead right now?
Yeah, I'd add one thing. I do think it's the company's responsibility. When we left our offices, we actually drop shipped a lot of peripherals and other things to our employees because it's our job to support them. We have some employees that don't have the easiest place to do calls or some of the things we need. So we've been able to put them on digital assignments so that they can kind of work through that. I think companies have a lot of responsibility to take care of folks in this time. We have some folks that, may not have had easy access to internet, so we ship them internet cards. So, I know that's not possible for every size of business, but I think if you're doing business right in this time and shape of space, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just one more, just a shout out for the upcoming webinar on cybersecurity. As you move people out of an office with its own network infrastructure and everybody's working from home, the security aspects become really complicated and really important. So I'm personally looking forward to that upcoming conversation.
Awesome.
Well, we're just coming down to the final couple of minutes of today's webinar, and I just want to close it out with this final question about what people's home situation is. It's definitely been at the forefront of my mind as someone who has a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home, and so I'm interested in seeing what other folks out there are experiencing. A couple of the comments that I heard today that really stuck with me, and I think Ashleigh and Britt, you were touching on this, which is we really are all experiencing the same thing completely different, and recognizing we all have our anxieties, we all have our stress, but that's not the universal reality for everyone else, and that others are experiencing things that are flavored very differently, and that we will then react very differently, and then will react very differently to the things that are happening, and how we can take empathy to a completely new level at a time when we're so physically separated from one another is a real challenge. So I'm incredibly grateful that the 3 of you were able to come on today and share your thoughts with our viewers. And I hope that each of the folks that have called in today will reach out to all 3 of these great resources. As you've got ideas, check out their websites and their LinkedIn pages. I know they've been a great resource for us. I know that it is great to continue these webinars out into the future. As I said, we've got a couple coming up just next week. We will be focusing on, if I have it here, maybe I don't. Again, that cybersecurity webinar that was being referred to is going to be on Tuesday, I believe. Tuesday at, there it is, Tuesday, April 7th at 9:30. So if you haven't had a chance to register for that, go to bellevuechamber.org and click on events, and you can access all of our different webinars that we've been hosting. And all of the ones, including the one from today, will be available online, both on Facebook and on YouTube here in the next 24 hours. So share it around. We've had just hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 folks that have spent time with us over the last week, and listened to some of the greatest experts around on some of the issues that people really, really care about. So we will close it there. Again, I appreciate our panelists. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will hope to see you next week. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.